All right. Somebody open us up in prayer. Thank you. Amen. Thank you. All right, Jeff, actually, we are at slide 39. So if you could skip ahead, yes. And we have been talking about marriage and divorce in the Bible as a whole. That is, we took a little break. We've been, I was about to say cruising through 1 Corinthians. That is the opposite of what we've been doing. A gentle stroll through 1 Corinthians, but I decided just to take a little break since in chapter 7, Paul deals with the issue of marriage and divorce, and I thought maybe it would be a good idea just to take a step back and look at those themes in the Bible as a whole. So, I think it has been a long time. Is that slide 39? Yes, it is. Oh. That's not my slide 39. Did I send you one this morning? All right. I think I sent you one this morning. Well, it's been a while since we've done a quiz, and it might be even longer if we do not have if we don't have the right slide. No? That's all right, I can wing it. Getting there? While he's doing that, welcome to some new faces. And just a little bit of how this class goes. I know it's kind of a lecture style, but at any time you have a question, please raise your hand, and I am fully willing to venture off into any area that you want to discuss. There we go. All right. Sorry, guys. Quiz. All right. Review. Ancient marriages were like modern marriages. You date, fall in love, then get married. True or false? False. The modern marriage, right, romance precedes marriage. You get to know each other. You spend time alone together, hopefully behaving yourselves. But still, you find out if you are socially compatible, and then you make the plunge into marriage, right? In an ancient marriage, that's not the case. For many young couples, the first time you ever spent a time alone together was on your wedding night. So that is an important perspective when we talk about ancient marriages, especially in the Old and New Testaments, and divorce. All right, second question. In an ancient marriage arrangement, the husband gave the father of the bride the dowry, the bride price, or a big hug, to which the father says, "Call me dad." This one's a little tougher. B and C. B and C. B and C. That's actually, I didn't anticipate that. Yes, they are not actually mutually exclusive in any of these. Okay. Yes, B and C, the husband gives the bride price to the father, whereas the father gives the husband and the wife the dowry. What's your name again? Yes. Followed by a big hug. All right. Next slide. We looked at this passage last week. Am I on it? There we go. All right. We looked at this passage last week and looked at some of the nuances of this divorce law in Deuteronomy. And we looked at the first case. In the first case, the husband discovers something unseemly. What the NAS here has, he has found some indecency in her. And by the first century, this was taken to mean some sort of sexual infidelity, and it most certainly was not that in its original context. Rather, we're probably talking about some sort of ritual impurity that is found on her. Remember, probably the first time, well, certainly the first time that the clothes were off, right, was their wedding night. And if there was something, some sort of ritual impurity on her, perhaps a boil or blemish, the husband may simply have been turned off by this. The husband may also not have wished to sacrifice the livestock required to establish ritual purity, right? He himself may have been rendered impure by this blemish, okay? All of this this is why I stress again and again that in ancient marriages, romance follows marriage. Because otherwise, from our perspective, a lot of what I'm saying is going to sound very, very harsh. Like, can't you look past these things? I suggested that the first husband may have been entitled to some sort of monetary compensation if the parents of the bride purposefully admitted the girl's condition. It would have been a cover-up, something like a deceit. And so he would have divorced her and kept, perhaps, part of or all of the dowry. Marriages, fundamental to marriages in the ancient world, was money. It was financial. It was a transaction. In the second case, the husband divorces the wife because he hates her. I've added the words hate and put it in quotations. That's not what the NAS has, but that is what the Hebrew literally means there. If the latter husband hates her and writes her a certificate of divorce. Or, we have two conditions here. The husband either hates her and divorces her or dies. And I suggested that the best background for this hate language is found in ancient divorce documents, where the term is used almost in a technical sense to indicate what we would call a no-fault divorce. This husband either simply has decided he does not wish to remain married, or perhaps he has an eye on someone else. In this case, the husband would be obliged to return the girl's dowry. Okay? The father gave the husband the dowry, but it was technically hers in cases of divorce or in cases of death. Or the husband simply dies, in which case the girl retains the dowry, as well as some inheritance. This explains why our first husband, who divorced her, might want to remarry her. Let it sink in. This is a legal code. This is not about romance, right? This is law. Well, the judges nipped that one in the bud and said that once you have divorced a woman, you cannot remarry her. Okay? That just cancels that whole financial conniving. She is defiled to him, right? Off limits. Someone asked last week, Kyle, I believe it was you, whether there was any relevancy between this and Jesus' words on love or hate. What was the passage? I'm sorry. It was about the parents, right? Jesus says, if you do not hate your parents. Yeah, and I think I gave a half-truth there. I said this was not the right background, and that's technically true because this we're dealing with legal language, technical language. Hate here is devoid of emotions. The second husband does not loathe her. He simply is filing a no-fault divorce. However, Jesus' words there are a Semitic idiom. He is not also advocating that children should loathe their mother and father. If you offered me mint chocolate chip ice cream, and you know what, I'm going to keep it simple because I'm going to forget what ice creams. If you offered me vanilla and chocolate ice cream, and you offered them both, I would say, oh my gosh, I love both of those. But if you said, you are only allowed one, then I would say, oh, I love chocolate ice cream, and I hate vanilla ice cream. See the difference? Okay. When it's an alternative, when an alternative is being presented, a mutually exclusive alternative, this Semitic idiom is used simply for preference, rejecting one and accepting the other. No emotions. You're not going to say, really, you don't like vanilla ice cream? I say, no, I have it all the time. But when you offer me chocolate or vanilla, I love chocolate and I hate vanilla. Make sense? All right, wanted to clear that up. Let's look at this certificate. The husband who divorces his wife is required to hand her a certificate of divorce. Now, I have mentioned before that the Old Testament laws probably preserve those laws that were unique to Israel. The law is, in fact, very, very short. We sometimes hear it complained about, oh my gosh, there's so many laws. How could they possibly memorize all those laws as if it was a burden? And that is anachronistic, okay? Consider how many laws you obeyed just getting to church today without even thinking about it. Right? Did you pull out and say, oh, is it the left side of the road or the right side? What does that red sign mean? I hope not. If you did, I'm glad you made it. No. Most of the laws, okay, were quite easy to remember, and even the more difficult ones, like all those sacrificial laws, right? What cow, what... You didn't have to know those. You went to a professional. You consulted a Levite or a priest. That was their job, right? Just as today, you would consult a lawyer. You're not required to know all the laws. So that's a major pet peeve of mine. In this case, though, so the divorce certificate appears to be a unique feature of Israel law. So far, we have discovered no parallels in other cultures. We have divorce documents, from which we learn quite a bit, but they were written up by and for courts. The husband did not have to hand a certificate which the divorced woman retained. So, why? What is important about this certificate? Well, it served a number of purposes. First, it delayed a rash divorce. Second, it allowed the woman to remarry without fear of being accused of adultery. All right, let me give you some examples. I get into a fight with my wife and I am impelled to divorce her. Well, I have to write a divorce certificate, and this might take a couple of days. I have to get the material. I may have to go to a judge and make sure the wording is legit. I may have to go to a scribe to write it because I don't know how to write myself, and my jets might cool in the meantime. Divorce is thereby thwarted. Let us say, however, my jets have not cooled yet. By handing her a divorce certificate, she can now remarry without fear of my knocking on the door of her new husband saying, "Where is my wife?" That would be very serious in consequences. With the certificate, she is thus protected against the charge of adultery against me. Likewise, the new husband is immune to the charge of adultery against me. Right? So the divorce certificate protects the woman and her next husband from false accusations. Now, because in this law, no mention of the wife signing a certificate and giving it to the husband is mentioned, it was assumed by New Testament times that only men could divorce. Women could not divorce their husbands. So when we get to the New Testament, it was unilateral. The assumption is a bit hasty. Women, in the original context, may have originally been able to divorce husbands. We know they could in other ancient cultures. But only a wife required the certificate because only a wife could commit adultery against her husband. And this inches us nearer and nearer to a feature that makes us all rather uncomfortable. I'll broach this carefully. A husband cannot legally commit adultery against his wife in the Old Testament. See, a woman's marriage assumed monogamy on her part. On her part. Legally, she could not maintain sexual relations with a husband and another man. That was adultery. A husband's marriage did not assume monogamy on his part. For a husband could legally have sex with another woman, namely another wife. Right? Patriarchal polygamy was legal. Men could have more than one wife, and thus the potential for multiple wives factors into ancient divorce laws and sexual infidelity. Right? Adultery can only, in the Old Testament, can only be committed against a husband. And this will help us, maybe not like, it's not my job, but help us understand some other passages in the Old Testament. Let's see. Slide 41. I'll let you read. Notice that the marital status of the man is undeclared. All that matters is the marital status of the woman. And in this case, she is neither married nor engaged to be married. Neither have committed adultery. She is not married and therefore cannot commit adultery. The man may be married, but he has not committed adultery. Adultery is always in the Old Testament against another man. The man has not committed adultery. He has legally sinned. He has sinned against the woman's father. And therefore, he must pay a bride price, right? He has treated her as a bride and therefore must literally pay. And the father has the choice of going through with it or not. Legally, the father can take the bride price and withhold the bride. Next slide. And again, notice that the marital status of the man is undeclared because legally it does not matter. He will be treated the same whether married or not. The woman's status is declared because it matters greatly, and here she is married. Both have committed adultery against the wife's husband. So as I'm reading this, I realize, wow, this is a really, really big downer of a lesson. There'll be good stuff in the end, I hope. All right, so conclusion. The divorce certificate protected the woman from accusations of adultery and any later husband. And this may have given another husband, a second husband, some peace of mind. I mean, people talk. He hears that this woman was once married. Was she still married? No, she has a divorce certificate. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, both the adulterer and adultery. If I said, I might have mixed up my words. If I said that only a woman can commit adultery, that's not true. You can only commit adultery against a husband. So the man is guilty and the woman is guilty. They are both guilty against the other husband. That's how we would go. Yeah, good question. All right, next passage. This passage is a little more about marriage, but my guess is, well, this one's a little longer. I'll read it. When a man takes a wife and marries her, no, that's not it. Where are we? That is it. Next slide, 44. Sorry. I have a habit of changing last minute in the middle of the night, everything, and I just need to learn not to, because it throws me off, which obviously will throw you off. Here we go. All right. And if a man sells his daughter as a female slave, she is not to go free as the male slaves do. If she is displeasing in the eyes of her master, who designated her for himself, then he shall let her be redeemed. He does not have authority to sell her to a foreign people because of his unfairness to her. If he takes to himself another woman, he may not reduce her food, her clothing, or her conjugal rights. And if he will not do these three things for her, then she shall go out for nothing, without payment of money. I know that there's a lot here that is very troubling, especially just the theme of slavery in general. But we're going to have to focus just on the issues that relate to marriage and divorce. And you'll notice that the lawmaker here has no problem with polygamy. It is simply assumed as legitimate, right? The master has a slave wife and then later marries 2 wives. And this makes us very uncomfortable. We don't like polygamy. Well, guess what? Neither did the ancients. It is legal, but it was never, ever the ideal. Sometimes it was necessary. The Old Testament is written in a wartime society. The infamous story of David and Bathsheba begins with David staying home when kings would go to war. That's the quote. Right? Kings would go to war. And that's what you did. Everybody knew that during a certain season you would go in order to reassert your claim on your land, your territory, right, boundaries, or perhaps encroach upon someone else's land. Every year you would go to war. And only males go to war, and we all know that in war people die. So what happens when the soldiers return and there is a deficit of bachelors and a surplus of bachelorettes? Sorry, ladies, you're on your own? Well, the Old Testament decided no. In certain cases, polygamy was necessary for survival. Actually, most of the laws and features of the Bible that make us extremely uncomfortable, like polygamy, slavery, they're not considered ideals, but they are socially necessary for survival. All right. From this text, actually, you know what? Just to point out again that it was never an ideal. It was always just a lesser of 2 evils. The poverty of women when there is a deficit of marriageable men. By the 1st century, we see how uncomfortable some people are with polygamy. Next slide, 45. So on your left is Genesis, and on your right is Jesus' quote of this. And I want you to read carefully and see if you can notice any differences. Use this opportunity to get water. Answers? No? All right. Jesus says on your right, "For this cause a man shall leave his father and mother and shall cleave to his wife, and the 2 shall become one flesh." On your left, Genesis, "For this cause a man shall leave his father and his mother and shall cleave to his wife, and they shall become one flesh." Right, Jesus has inserted the word 2. But that was not in the Hebrew original. Because a man could be one flesh with more than one woman. One flesh simply means one family. So Jacob was one flesh with both Rachel and Leah. Right? By the time we get to the 1st century, though, Jews are more and more uncomfortable with this. And so some of them interpret the passage and insert the word to eliminate polygamy. Christianity followed Jesus' interpretation. Judaism did not formally abolish polygamy until about 1000 AD. But nobody was ever comfortable with it. They all knew that it was an unfortunate necessity. All right. Any questions? No? Let's play along. Let's look at slide 46. So, at this point, in the biblical story, polygamy is allowed because it's necessary. From this passage, well, like our passage about divorce, this passage is actually about a very specific case of neglect. So, a man is married a female slave and then later married a free woman. I know that this passage will raise a lot of questions, and we can't answer them today. Perhaps in another lesson. We don't really have a lot of lessons left, man, do we? Okay. I was going to say, if the issue of slavery in the Bible is like a pressing concern, then you can let me or Jeff know, and I will take some time to talk about it. But if it is a pressing concern, let Jeff or me know soon, because I think we got like 3 or 4 Sunday school lessons left. This passage lays down the obligation of a husband to his slave wife. And the rabbis by Jesus' time rightly inferred from this that these were the obligations of all marriages, right? I mean, if it applied to a slave wife, it certainly applied to a free wife. And thus we can deduce the basic marriage arrangement of a household. The husband is to provide raw material, okay, food to be cooked, cotton to be spun and sewn, and children to be nurtured. And the wife reciprocates. She cooks the food, spins the cotton, and nurtures the children. And that is the reciprocal balance of an ancient marriage. Was there romance? Yes, of course. Absolutely. This is the law. This is a very legal ruling that arose from a very specific case. So, neglect of any of these was grounds for divorce. If a man is unwilling to provide his wife with raw material, if he will not provide her with food to be cooked, wool to be spun, and children to be raised, then he must divorce her. In this passage, the slave woman therefore goes without payment of money. That is, she does not have to buy her freedom. He paid money for her. He must take a financial loss. In the case of a neglected free woman, okay, the husband would have to return her dowry. He would divorce her and return the dowry. All right, let's get away from all these legalities and let's do something maybe a little more cheerful. Yeah, absolutely. At the end of verse 8, if she is displeasing in the eyes of her man, then he does not have authority to. The unfairness probably has to do with the 3 things. The unfairness is that the neglect is already happening. That's a good question. Yeah, I didn't really. I'll get back to you on that. I'll see if there's anything more to be said about that later on. All right. Let's do something a little more cheerful. Slide 47. I've said again and again that the biblical authors build off one another. Okay? Jeremiah knows Deuteronomy. Biblical theology is kind of like improvisation. If you ever take an improv class, like the number 1 rule is like, you never say no. You say yes and, right? So if I do something, you don't say, oh, I don't like that, I'm going to go in a different direction. You have to work with me. So you say yes, but I'm going to develop this in a new direction, you know. Yes and that is how biblical theology works. They're always working off of each other, borrowing off of each other. So the passage in Deuteronomy, we looked at it before, says that if you divorce your wife, okay, you can't remarry her, right? And Jeremiah is playing off of this law. God says, if a husband divorces his wife and she goes from him and belongs to another man, will he still return to her? Will not that land be completely polluted? But you are a harlot with many lovers, yet you turn to me, declares the Lord, right? Jeremiah presents Yahweh as if he is in the midst of a legal problem, right? The prophet is playing a bit with Deuteronomy 24. God was married to Israel. Jeremiah accuses Israel of being married to other men, namely other gods, right? The marriage metaphor is used for idolatry. Can Yahweh remarry Israel? How is this legally possible, right? Deuteronomy forbids it. Even if Israel returns to the Lord, how can he remarry her? They're divorced. She's been with other gods. This should be the end of the story. Well, Jeremiah makes some interesting maneuvers. Next slide. Again, I will build you, and you shall be rebuilt, O Virgin of Israel. Again, you shall take up your tambourines and go forth to the dances of the merrymakers. What? No. Virgin Israel? Our Jeremiah's entire marriage analogy makes it explicit. Israel is no fair maiden. And yet Jeremiah depicts a day when she shall be. She will one day dance like it's at her first wedding. How is this possible? Well, we have to wait a bit. Next slide. Behold, days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah, not like the covenant which I made with their fathers in the day I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt, my covenant which they broke, although I was a husband to them, declares the Lord. But this is the covenant which I will make with the house of Israel after those days, declares the Lord. I will put my law within them, and on their heart I will write it, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. The solution is that this is a new kind of covenant because it is a new kind of people, right? This is not the old Israel. This is Israel transformed. She is not the same. To borrow from the marriage analogy, she becomes a virgin, right? God himself is going to do something. He's going to change them. They will be a new people, and therefore this is not a second marriage for Jeremiah, right? Jeremiah says, O virgin Israel, it is like Israel's infidelity is completely erased from God's mind. I often shy away from over-romanticizing marriage in the Bible, only because I approach it from an historical point of view. But the most romantic views of marriage in the Bible are always about God and Israel and Christ in the church. The law is not very romantic, right? So you want a romance novel, go to the prophets or go to Paul when he talks about Christ and the church. For Paul, Jeremiah's vision has been realized. Right? Christ has initiated this new creation. Actually, I think we have a slide just to show that he continues this marriage analogy. Yes. For I am jealous, he's talking to the Corinthians in his second letter to them, for I am jealous for you with a godly jealousy, for I betrothed you to one husband, that to Christ I might present you as a pure virgin. He is most certainly borrowing this from Jeremiah. All right? Christ has initiated this new creation. The Spirit is even now bringing a foretaste of it. Those in Christ are not the same, right? We know the Corinthians are a mess. And yet for all their faults, Paul still describes them as a pure virgin waiting to be married to Christ, their husband. All right, how much time do we have? 7:38. We good? You guys still? All right, let's continue. Any questions on that? All right. That concludes marriage, at least what I have to say about marriage and divorce in the Old Testament. We're going to talk about marriage and divorce in the New Testament. And much has changed. By the first century, so much had changed. The law was written, when the law was written, Israel's autonomy was assumed, right? Israel was to be its own nation. Well, Israel had not been autonomous since the days of Solomon, right? Capital punishment is now inflicted only by Rome's say, and adultery was not punishable by death according to Roman law. And so the rabbis had to reinterpret their Old Testament. We also need to point out that the rabbis were not modern scholars. They were removed from the Hebrew of the Pentateuch by more than 1,000 years. So in Palestine, Aramaic was the mother tongue, and outside of Palestine, Jews knew more Greek than Hebrew. So today, scholars, they seek the original context of the Pentateuch, which is what I've been kind of doing for the last couple lessons. Right? I mean, scholars go to excavations and they consult similar languages. First century rabbis were not modern scholars, right? They wanted to know how to apply the law to their own time. And so it is no surprise that they interpret the law in a way that diverges from modern interpretations. When we get to the first century, the big debate is between two rabbinical schools. One of them are the Hillelites, named after their teacher, Hillel, and the other are the Shammaites, named after Shammai. And the big debate between these schools, let's go to slide 52, was on the interpretation of Deuteronomy 24:1. Now, as I said, the original context here, that matter of indecency, okay, most certainly did not have to do with adultery or infidelity. The punishment for that was death. But you get to the first century, and a lot of things have changed. Rome now has control over capital punishment. We might also add that my guess is many Jews felt uncomfortable. They probably did not like putting people to death, and so they might have softened the law a little bit. For the Shammaites, this verse was all about adultery. That's what a matter of indecency meant. The Hillelites were arguing that the verse meant a husband could divorce his wife for any reason, even if she burnt his bread. Let's look at, actually, I think we're behind a little. Let's go to 53. There we go. So, the school of Shammai says, a man should not divorce his wife unless he found in her a matter of indecency. As it is said, for he finds in her a matter of indecency. And the school of Hillel says, even if she spoiled his dish, since it says, for he finds in her a matter of indecency. Interpreting rabbinic literature is extremely difficult, and you have to read between the lines a little bit. In this passage, the Hillelites were focusing on the word matter, an indecent matter. And if burnt bread displeases you, then it is a displeasing matter. The Shammaites were focusing entirely on the word indecency, a matter of indecency. For them, a matter of indecency can only refer to infidelity. So the Shammaites were saying Deuteronomy 24 only allowed divorce in the case of adultery. That's what the Shammaites were going with. Deuteronomy 24:1 is about adultery. The Hillelites were saying, no, what that text means is anything displeasing is grounds for divorce. anything displeasing, even if she burns your toast. This is going to be very important when we look at Matthew, when Jesus is debating the Pharisees. For right now, though, I want to just challenge what I think might be an inclination of many modern readers. We are likely to side with the Shamites and think the Hillelites cruel, right? Burnt toast. Come on, get over yourselves, right? I first want to say the Hillelites did not celebrate divorce, okay? This was a legal issue. They wanted to know on what legal grounds a husband can divorce his wife. And the Hillelites argued that any ground was legitimate for divorce. And I'm going to say this, the Hillelite divorce in some sense favored the woman, right? The any grounds divorce favored the woman because it was an easy divorce. And an easy divorce means the woman retained the dowry. In the case of adultery, she did not retain the dowry. She lost that money. And it was going to be very, very hard for her to remarry. An easy divorce, she retains the dowry. All right, it was a no-fault divorce. It was a no-hassle divorce. A Shamite divorce is nasty. All right, the woman would be humiliated, whether she was guilty or not. She would be brought to court. There would be witnesses called, perhaps false witnesses. If she lost, she would be destitute. She would be among the poor. And Jewish law requires Jews to take care of the poor, right? So it would be the community that would pretty much have to meet her needs, even with their disapproving heads. The Hillelite is easy divorce, and so it was pain-free for everyone. No witnesses, no court, and most importantly, as I've said again, the woman kept her dowry and could remarry. And I want to present a scenario that might put the Hillelite position in different lighting. All right, let's role play a little bit. Hello, I am a Jew from Judah, and I am in quite a conundrum. I am betrothed to a young woman, which basically means I am married, yet she has not moved in with me. And she is starting to show. We have not known each other. Known each other. You know the idiom. She swears she has known no other man. In fact, her parents defend her. She has never been out of their presence or the presence of her brothers. She has never been alone with another man not related to her. And what's more, she insists this baby growing in her was miraculously bestowed by Elohim. I mean, what is this? Like some sick Greek story? We're Jews. We don't believe in this. So what am I to do? I could drag her before a Shamite court, accuse her of adultery against me. Now, granted, they require witnesses, and I don't have any witness. Well, I have one witness, right? Bloop. And I doubt a Shamite court will accept her explanation, so I would probably win. Her father would owe me the dowry, which I was depending on to buy a shop and furnish it with tools, and well, she would be destitute and would bring shame to her family. But she and they seem so pious and so sincere. No, I guess I will seek a Hillelite court. They require no hassle, no witnesses, just paperwork. For all I know, I can just come and say, I'm out, I heard she was a bad cook, and leave it at that. She would retain her dowry, which she will certainly need if she ever hopes to marry. And I, Joseph, will be righteous in this matter. I will not disgrace her. That should throw a little bit of lighting on the next passage. More than likely, Joseph was contemplating not taking Mary, but going to a Hillelite court. He was going to end the marriage with a no-hassle divorce. I'm just saying this just to put some color onto the New Testament and the Bible in general. Any questions? No? Too much? Yeah.
So, if he went to the
Mhm.
court, would she would just be destitute? They wouldn't stone her?
No, yeah.
So what would trigger the death sentence? What am I missing?
In the first
Adultery was,
century,
in the time period change.
there's a big time period change. Yeah, big time period change. You know.
Okay, but this is first century. This isn't during.
Right. So they're going to interpret their Old Testament according to first century context. Absolutely. And so when we study it, we also have to make that adjustment. Yeah. All right, it's 10 minutes till. That's usually when we call it close. That's probably a lot. I see a lot of pondering heads. So, yeah, as a Sunday school teacher, like I'm always guilty of giving too much rather than not enough. So, my hope is that at least one thing you latch onto and say, oh, that's interesting. Oh, that really brings that passage to light. So, that is my goal. We are off the next 2 Sundays, and then back on. So I think it's fair to say we are not going to finish 1 Corinthians. I promise one thing, though. We will do chapter 15 around Easter time, since chapter 15 is all about the resurrection. And it's important, I think, for us to, talk about that. If you scroll through 1 Corinthians and you're like, okay, if we could just talk about one passage that's really troubling, can we please do this passage? Please let me know or let Jeff know. There are a lot of troublesome passages ahead that we won't be able to get through. I'm wary because one of you is going to go through and say, okay, can we talk about women and long hair? But if you bring it to me, then yeah, we will talk about that. All right, could somebody close us in prayer? All right, see you in 2 weeks. Yeah.